Good evening. You're either watching or listening to Redwood Wonk. I'm with David Frank. My name is Eric Kirk. We are talking national politics of the day, and there is so much going on. It's only, they didn't even let New Year's happen without a lot happening here. Usually it's kind of slow for the first week or two, but things are heating up already, particularly the presidential election race. And I recommend that everybody read an article in the New Republic. It deals with the question of how the Democrat. Well, this is the title. It will be an election unlike any we've lived through. Are the Democrats prepared? It's written by Michael Tomasky, who is basically of my generation. Grew up, reached adulthood in the early '80s, and sort of sees the narrative in terms of a long stretch of events from Reaganism to Trumpism. But it's really important that I think people read this because it so far in this in Mr. Tomasky's opinion, the Democrats have not really reacted well to or prepared well for what's to come. Trump is going to push for chaos. There's going to be death threats against public officials over these trials and the 14th Amendment decision that we'll discuss in the next segment. Actually, decisions, there are two of them now, and it is just going to be, it's probably going to make 2016 and 2020 look like calm parties or something. I don't have a good analogy for it right now, but it's just the the real question is Biden up for this, and are the Democrats up for this, and are they ready to respond aggressively and to attack aggressively the fact that much of the media and many politicians, including most Republicans and even some Democrats, seem to don't have a real sense, at least in my opinion, of the full gravity and of what happened on and around January 6th, 2021, and what that meant and what it means and what Project 2025 is saying right then and there as to what the agenda will be. There's a lot to take on here, but the suggestion, of course, is that that Biden make it about the about the threat to democracy, and that the Democrats really hit hard on this point because it just doesn't seem to have sunk in with we don't know what's sunk in with the voters yet. I think the polls, I actually again see the polls. The polls tell me that Biden is favored to win just because of the double-digit numbers of undecideds. Undecideds broke for Biden last time. I think they'll break for Biden this time as well. But there's so much to discuss here. But Dave, I understand you read the article in the New Republic as well.
Yeah, so thanks for that setup. I would say that the article's a little disturbing in the sense that the author is trying to sort of shock people into recognizing what he, I guess, is anticipating. And I think one of the highlight quotes is talking about candidate Trump. It says about his, I guess, Trump social message that he put out online around Christmas time. And the quote is from the article: "His rhetoric will get wilder and wilder, as it did with his purported Christmas message, which included the holiday wish that Biden and Special Prosecutor Jack Smith and anyone who's not MAGA may rot in hell." And imagine what those rallies will be like in September and October, especially if he's been convicted of a crime or two. So it's like a foreshadowing of this desperation that might be the reality of, as Trump gets cornered or boxed in, he might be a little bit more unhinged, I guess. Not to say that
Right.
we can't really anticipate what's going to happen, but that's just to kind of shock us into being aware of what we're about to come across. I think that some of the technical issues that he points out, and I'll just use one. I'll start with one, for example, which is that the Democratic Party is actually splintering a little bit. For example, the Palestinian support that is coming from the left and the far left, but also from other mainstream Democrats. In contrast that with the support for the unconditional, sort of uncritical, reflexive support of Israel, that this is a little bit of a civil war inside the party, and including at the higher education. I was going to say highest levels of education, but what does that mean exactly? So if the Democratic Party is splintered, and some people say I'm either not going to show up or I'm going to cast a vote for a third party. If you look at some of the polling, the Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Has a decent support amongst, like I think we've talked about before, young people 18 to 35, also people of color. And we've seen that the no labels movement is saying, hey, they floated the idea of a coalition government. If the problem being, if nobody gets the 270 that's needed, then the election would go to the House. That happened in 1824. And I'll say one last detail about it before you give some feedback. But in 1824, Henry Clay threw his support to John Quincy Adams in exchange for becoming his Secretary of State, and that has gone down as the corrupt bargain. So it's called the corrupt bargain for a reason. So this is foreshadowing. We may see some corrupt bargaining going on if it looks like Biden and Trump are not going to. One of them doesn't reach the 270.
Almost like a parliamentary system. It's a possibility. It did happen. Of course, Andrew Jackson lost that one, and he, I think, is actually probably one of the closest figures to Trump in our history. I mean, just basically ignored a Supreme Court ruling regarding treaties with Native Americans, but he also did pass universal white male suffrage, which brought in lower class voters that he could appeal to. But that was the ultimate outcome. Supposedly, some historians say that was the backlash to the corrupt deal, because he would defeat John Quincy Adams in the next election. And John Quincy Adams and his father John Adams, in the first 13 presidents, are the only two that didn't own slaves at some point in their life. I mean, this was, so that was a defeat of basically, for the time, a liberal by kind of reaction. Are we repeating history here? Who knows? I mean, we have, as the article pointed out, as we've discussed on the show previously, his use of the word vermin to describe his opponents. That has a very specific historic context. It's what Hitler used to describe Jews, communists, whatever. It's going to be extremely contentious. Trump is going to be basically running for his freedom as well as for the office. I mean, he's hoping to stay out of jail, right? He just, as of I think either today or yesterday, was denied his postponement of the defamation trial. A second trial, I think, because he keeps defaming her, in terms of his rape of the woman. That's happening within a couple of weeks, and there's going to be, of course, it's all seen as a deep state conspiracy, and of course we have, as we'll discuss in the next segment, two states now which, through their separate processes, have determined that by virtue of the 14th Amendment, Donald Trump does not qualify on their ballot. We'll see what the Supreme Court does with it. I tend to think that they will overturn it, and we'll talk about that. Not necessarily legitimately, by the way, So we've got all of this happening, and you've got, what is it? I think a third of the Republican Party believing that a third of the voters believe that the 2020 election was stolen. This
Yeah.
is the context, and taken from, so they don't have any faith in the system whatsoever. Anything that's going on, they see it as a part of the deep state plot. And so how do Biden and the Democrats respond to this? And he's got some proposals, but I also think that there are some ways that they can actually bring back into the fold some of the people of color that they're losing. Maybe not the Palestinians living in Michigan, where they could actually, in a closed election, make a difference. I don't know that the Palestinians are going to be in a mood to vote for anybody in November, and that could hurt Joe Biden because normally they're in the Democratic camp. But I actually on a future show want to discuss the Vice President Kamala Harris. Everybody sees her as a weakness in the ticket, but she could, in a campaign, actually be kind of aggressive when it comes to rights. That her September-October Rights of the People tour. I may have that name slightly wrong, but it was actually successful on a number of levels. So I think they need to not be afraid to put her out front because she is an attack dog. That's what she did for a living. But there's so much again to discuss in how the Democrats have to handle this election, but they can't do it timid. They can't be. Biden cannot afford to just be the above the fray statesman who doesn't respond to attacks because they're beneath him. He's got to hit back when they happen. And he's already out right now, just even as recent as yesterday, basically saying that Trump is an existential threat to democracy. But they got to make the sale. They got to convince everybody.
I think you put about 3 different ideas on the table there, so hopefully I can address them, evenly. But they do blend together, so rightfully so. But the way that the author framed it was that, as the big challenge for Democrats is, it appears that Democrats have not figured out how to build a narrative that counters the negativity that comes from Trump and the GOP writ large. So MAGA Nation, the House GOP leadership, less or so the Senate, but the Senate does have some firebrands too. And so you mentioned that, and the article really points this out, that's what it's going to take. It's going to take going on the offensive. It's going to take crafting a narrative, and the fact that Biden's age is and his mental acuity, and maybe physical agility have all been already made him a punching bag to the critics. And with Kamala Harris being the vice president and the person who would be next if anything, awful would to happen, they're going to hammer on that. Like the author is anticipating that Trump is going to be a bully, and he's going to hammer on Kamala Harris, and he's going to hammer on Biden, and that, so the Democrats really do need to connect in a way, that the messaging really does have a counter narrative, and does instead of just instead of just promoting the idea that fascism is on the ballot, or this is not a time for apathy to just sit home and see what happens out of spite. I think he's saying, every day, like they have to actually have a campaign. They have to actually have an agenda. But more so, he mentions that they need to behave, project an air of confidence, a sense of victory. Name names, name bad guys. That's the thing. Go after the things that, if you want to say that you did this, you accomplished these things. Say who blocked them, who tried to block them, who's against them. He's saying, his quote is, mock them all, mock Mike Johnson, mock Jim Jordan. He's saying the Republican Party, that they're frightening. This is a quote, but it's also an absurdist parody. So don't ignore that second part. That when Mike Johnson and Jim Jordan get out there, that those are potentially personalities that are worth attacking, because it's emblematic of GOP leadership writ large.
there's a lot to talk about with this article, but we're out of time for this segment. We will take this up again, obviously in different forms.
Senator Reverdy Johnson worried that the final version of Section 3 did not include the office of the presidency. He stated this amendment does not go far enough because past rebels may be elected president or vice president of the United States. So he asked, why did you omit to exclude them? I do not understand them to be excluded from the privilege of holding the two highest offices in the gift of the nation. Senator Lot Morrill fielded this objection. He replied, let me call the senator's attention to the words, or hold any office, civil or military, under the United States. This answer satisfied Senator Johnson, who stated, perhaps I am wrong as to the exclusion from the presidency. No doubt, I am.
Donald Trump has been removed from the ballot officially in 2 states. First, Colorado, which had a trial, week-long trial, and then where the judge decided against the removal. However, the Colorado Supreme Court, in a 4-3 decision, determined that he does not qualify for ballot status in Colorado via the 14th Amendment and Colorado laws. Other states have rejected that. A lot of times based on their own law. Not every state has the same laws. But however, Maine has a process in which a person is approved for the ballot and a challenge can be made to that. And the Secretary of State actually takes up and holds a hearing on that challenge. She held an 8-hour hearing and made the determination saying, this was all very close. It was in both cases, it was challenges raised by Republicans. I believe in Maine, it was 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans and 1 Democrat, all 3 of whom were ex-legislators in Maine, but legislators. But she made the decision. She said there were a lot of close aspects to the law and the procedure, but she said what was not close is that Donald Trump participated in an insurrection and had previously taken an oath. That was obvious. I'm going to really quickly read the Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. No person shall be a senator or representative in Congress or elector of president and vice president or hold any office, civil or military, under the United States or under any state who, having previously taken an oath as member of Congress or as an officer of the United States or as a member of any state legislature or as an executive judicial officer of any state to support the Constitution of the United States shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same or given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof. But Congress may, by a vote of 2/3 of each house, remove such disability. So that's obviously not going to happen. But that's what the 14th Amendment says. The most common criticism I'm seeing and the basis that the Supreme Court is expected by many legal scholars to overturn both Colorado and Maine is to say that last sentence, Congress, pardon me, not that sentence, but partly that sentence and then partly another line in another section of the 14th Amendment that says Congress shall enact legislation to enable, to enforce these laws. That actually not enforce, implement these laws, and so there are 2 arguments. One is that only Congress, until Congress does that, no state can enforce these laws, and that the state doesn't have jurisdiction based on the presence of Congress in that whole process. That's a very liberal construction argument. It's not a strict construction argument. The other argument that they're making is that he has not been convicted of insurrection, therefore should not be removed by virtue of due process. Well, it's the 14th Amendment, again, says nothing about convictions. It just says whether or not they did it. And states have their own evidentiary processes to make that determination. And that's what these 2 rulings are based on. Again, Minnesota and Wisconsin rejected it, but they've got different laws, state laws, in terms of whether or not the 14th Amendment is enforceable. So this is happening. but there are a number of people, a number of prominent voices who are saying, yes, the 14th Amendment does say this, but no, you shouldn't do this because it's not good for the country. The country will explode if this happens, said David Brooks of the New York Times. He's a conservative guy, but he's a right of center, not a Trumper by any means, and usually kind of Burkean when it comes to the rule of law, saying you got to follow what the laws say. He is a conservative that way, but he actually says, yeah, the law is written that way, but the Supreme Court needs to shut this down before it destroys the country. That is the argument here. And there are a lot of Democrats and even liberals who are saying, yeah, what if that happens to us because Republicans define insurrection their way in the absence of congressional implementing language. It's a really interesting question, rule of law versus keeping the country together. Dave, what do you got to say on this?
Yeah, I think for me, and we've talked about this before, but one of the most interesting elements is that we have two of the most prominent legal scholars in the country, Judge Michael Luttig and Lawrence Tribe. They wrote back in August that
Lawrence Tribe isn't conservative. He's actually kind of in the ACLU corner on a lot of stuff. But the other is definitely
correct. Yeah. So that they came up with this idea that they made it public and widespread that the 14th Amendment Section 3 applied here. And that's prominent legal scholars. In fact, Judge Luttig is the one that advised Mike Pence not to go through with that fake elector sort of flim-flam that was proposed. And then, so that's one key element. And then the question is, was the legal flim-flam to put in fake electors and have the election go to the House, or at least suspend the process? Does that constitute an insurrection, or did insurrection require some violence of some kind, or organization, or an uprising? So Trump's legal team actually put forward that argument that in fact it was not even an insurrection, and that application of that term doesn't apply, and so therefore this whole thing is moot. I'm not so sure about the self-executing part. It seems to me that it ought to be self-executing, but as we've talked about, Justice Kavanaugh, when he was at Georgetown writing for Georgetown Law Review, he thought that, yes, this is a real thing, but that they needed additional legislative language to implement, even though it was already implemented back during Reconstruction, between the Civil War and Reconstruction, and ultimately and Jim Crow. So the idea that who gets to make the call? Are 50 state secretaries of state, are they the ones that get to make the call? Well, now we've got different people making different arguments. So for example, Michigan, Minnesota, California, they've all thought about this and said, no, we're not doing it. Colorado and Maine have said they are doing it. One made its way all the way through the Supreme Court. One was, as you said, just through the Secretary of State's process. So this is ripe for the Supreme Court to step in and kind of settle things. But then the question is, I think you and I both are under the opinion that the Supreme Court will come up with an argument for why this is not valid. But one of the things you pointed out is, well, what about, there are liberals, there are Democrats who say, or conservative center right Democrats who say it's just bad for the country if this is the route we go, because if Trump really is defeated on a technicality, so to speak, then it would draw into question the legitimacy of the election, like you said, David Brooks mentioned. So it seems to me that it's going to play out because if top legal scholars think it ought to be this way, then the court has to do something. And the court of public opinion, I think, the Supreme Court already has a crisis of confidence in its legitimacy. So I don't think that whatever they say, I don't think is going to particularly undermine their credibility any worse than it already is.
Right. It's already gone for the moment. And definitely another writing that people might want to consider reading is George Conway wrote an article in the Atlantic entitled something along the lines of, if you want to know how weak the opposition argument is, just read the 3 dissents in the Colorado decision. And yeah, they're all over the map. We talked about this last time. They've got different theories, but all of them melt down to it's bad for the country. To be true, it would be good if Congress passed some implementing legislation so that there aren't 50 different results with 50 different states. But the fact of the matter is Congress has always been really weak in terms of taking leadership of the 14th Amendment, which is not just this section, but other sections, really a radical amendment. I had a Federalist Society person in law school tell me that the 14th Amendment ought to be struck down as unconstitutional because it contradicts the basic structure of the Constitution. And it's you've got and the 14th Amendment is also going to play into the politics because Trump is promising to sign an executive order doing away with birthright citizenship, which is based on very clear reading of the 14th Amendment. So it's it is very tricky. But you're dealing with a situation in which 1/3 of the country doesn't believe we have rule of law right now, that we have an illegitimate president in office, and all I see them arguing online is, what about his Fifth Amendment rights to due process? You have to require a criminal conviction. Again, the 14th Amendment doesn't say that. So if you're a strict constructionist, you're out of luck. If you're a liberal constructionist, living document kind of person, where you try to bring in the implications and stuff, maybe you've got an argument there, because it is leading to chaos. The fact that Congress for 150 years or whatever has shown no leadership on this. To pass any kind of meaningful implementing legislation. But I do think the Supreme Court will probably avoid the question of whether or not he was in an insurrection and focus on something more procedural, like the states just don't have the jurisdiction absent implementing legislation or something lame like that.
Yeah, so I have a question for you, but before I ask, I want to just pick up on that something lame part. So Michigan, speaking of lame, their Supreme Court said that it was premature to remove him from the ballot, that really this claim should apply to the general election and not the primary. Sure. I thought that seemed to be a stretch. There's no legal basis for that, right?
Apparently based on the Michigan's process for challenging. So again, this is what a lot of people are arguing, including one of the dissenters and David Brooks, is you've got different laws in different states, so you're going to have different results, and that's chaos because he'll be on some states' ballots and not on others. Well, every state has its own criteria that we have candidates all the time who don't qualify for ballot on all the states, certainly the third party candidates, but even major party candidates in the history, not in a long time, have not qualified on every single ballot. The rules have changed since then, but again, you can't judge a Colorado decision by Michigan law or vice versa. Every state has its own, not just criteria, but process for determining whether or not somebody has ballot status. And in Michigan, my understanding is that the primaries are considered actions of political parties, which are quasi-private institutions, as opposed to the general election, which is strictly a government affair. I don't know Michigan law enough to know whether or not that's a sound decision, but again, it's not the same situation. You're dealing with a different legal framework. It's like when Justice Souter was asked, how come you had so many conservative decisions when you were in New Hampshire and you've got so many liberal decisions now? It's like, well, when I was in New Hampshire, the laws were written by conservatives. It was a conservative state back then. I was enforcing New Hampshire law. That's the difference. But of course, the Secretary of State in Maine has received hundreds of death threats since then. She did not want to be in this position. She's written pieces in an interview saying, I didn't want to do this, but I had to, as a matter of law, accept the challenge and treat it fairly. And I found that he did in fact participate in an insurrection, and he had previously taken an oath.
So you're talking about Shayna Bellows, and I saw her interviewed a few times, and I agree with your assessment of her position that she shares during interviews. But one of the things that I thought was interesting in her comments when she basically said, people have criticized them for it not being a legal process, for her not being a lawyer or a judge, and but she made the point that well, we followed the process here in this state, and it's we had experts do the testifying, and we had people assess the letter of the law, and that this is our process and this is a responsibility we have. She said the secretaries of the states are conscientious about who gets included and excluded from ballots all the time. So this isn't extraordinary, and other than the fact that it's a presidential election.
Absolutely. But again, we've got this inflammatory situation, the current political culture. And some people are concerned about it. And I was surprised to see a Burkean conservative about the institutions of the rule of law like David Brooks say, you can't have this happen. You can't have a bunch of Harvard grads and Harvard and Yale grads take Trump off the ballot. There's just too many people that won't stand for it, and the country will explode. And he may be right, but again, I think the country's going to explode if Trump loses the election or is perceived to lose the election. So I don't know where it's going to go. We are in troubled times, and I think we'll end this segment on that. We'll be discussing it again.
Videos on social media show pro-Palestinian demonstrators at this New York City college chanting "Free Palestine," with Jewish students in the school library standing in fear as the demonstrators banged on those doors. At Cornell University in New York State, it turned vile. Graffiti such as this, mild, compared to brutally specific death threats posted online to rape and shoot Jews, even to behead Jewish babies. Police have now arrested a Cornell student on a federal criminal complaint. As for Jewish students at the university,
my family last night, we had a discussion whether it's safe for me to be on campus or whether I should come back home.
All right, we've discussed anti-Semitism on the left at least 2 or 3 times already on this show. It keeps coming back to it, but this time I sort of want to ask the question in terms of the frame of does the academic left, maybe the left in general, but does the academic left in particular need to take a closer look at itself? Now, it's timely because Claudine Gay, although it was sort of a delayed reaction, she didn't end up resigning as quickly as the other president, but she has basically resigned her office because she was personally attacked, death threats, N-word used against her, all kinds of horrific things, but she also felt that it would affect Harvard and its institution and as an institution. And so she did not want to be the lightning rod. Of course, she got caught on some matters that where she's accused of plagiarism. I've looked at it. I find it questionable, maybe a little sloppy, and not attributing in adopting some specific wording and not attributing it. But it really doesn't look like plagiarism to me, and it certainly wouldn't be an issue if we didn't have this other inflamed situation. But it's of course, Ms. Stefanik, Representative Stefanik, who was the one who was basically questioning the women when this all blew up because of their inability to be able to respond in a very definitive manner, whether or not it would be considered a violation of their campus rules to advocate the genocide of Jews. Why was that question so hard to answer? Why is it that the left is hesitant to even acknowledge? I've had leftists outright saying Jewish people are not marginalized, not in the same way that black people or LGBTQ are. And it's like, no, not in the same way, but they've certainly got the body counts to show that they are marginalized. And with anti-Semitic violence increasing all over the country, including some incidents on these campuses, we've discussed this before, but maybe we need to really take a close look at our fundamental ideology. I mean, I don't agree with the statement that criticism of Israel is inherently anti-Semitic, and actually nobody says that. Actually, what they do say is that the belief that Israel shouldn't exist is anti-Semitic, and people say, no, it has nothing to do. I don't hate Jews. I just think it was a mistake to create that country in the place that it was created. But we have this rule on the left, I think established by Derek Bell, that when marginalized people claim that something is an attack on them, something is derogatory towards them, we're supposed to give them the benefit of the doubt on that, and at least have a discussion about it. Is the left dropping the ball with regard to anti-Semitism? And we need to take a close look at it. And yes, Stefanik and other right-wingers are, taking their victory laps, showing the left for all its hypocrisy and all of that. But maybe we really do need to take a close look at that.
Well, I think there's a couple things at play here. I mean, obviously there's more than a couple, but there's a couple different angles and approaches here. You've taken the issue, you've proposed that this issue be looked at from a broader perspective of just the overall acceptance, I guess, of what President Claudine Gay said at the congressional hearing. What was that acceptable, not acceptable? And so, the big takeaway from that, I think, was that whether it was a lawyer or a human resources department or a board representing, the company of Harvard or the faculty of Harvard, whoever gave them their legal their testimony strategy, that I think that's the cleavage in the problem here, which is that that our language police, language scrutiny is so fragile that common sense evaporates. So Congressmember Stefanik, she said, yes or no, is genocide something you would investigate as period, right? And then there was no yes or no answer. It was everything is relative, and we got to give people we have to be relative here. And I've heard other people say this. It's not an original idea on my part, but in that situation, calling for the genocide of a people is something that you admonish. It's something that at the very least you investigate. So start your thought with, if it was the case that happened, yes, we would do it. Like, meet people where people use the English language, and then maybe say, but in this situation at our school, we did not see people calling for genocide. And you could describe what happened, and you could say there were students who were Palestinian advocates who have animosity in their tone and content against the decisions of the state of Israel and their military tactics. That speech should be protected as Go down that road of just meet people from common sense, but it's not common. So that's one thing. But then so there's the other piece of this, which is, well, then you opened up the door for political strategists like oh my goodness, what's his name? Rufo. So the guy who started anti-diversity, equity, and inclusion campaigns against the left, Christopher Rufo. This is him. He did this. He's been interviewed, and he said, "Hey, we did this. My crusade against critical race theory goes right through these people."
Yeah.
And we could get more into the details on that piece of it, but the idea is that it was ripe for the right. And he even tweeted out, hey, look, we're going to frame this in a way that we're going to get the left to do our heavy lifting, and she's going to be removed from office. I mean, you could look it up yourself, but basically he was basically saying this is an easy one. You hit them where it hurts, co-opt the left to be critical of her, and she's gone. And so that was a success, and then he gloated about it. So again, I know we're talking about does the left need to learn a lesson here? Well, when the right can so easily manipulate, or so successfully rather manipulate the situation to achieve their political goals, then you do need to reflect, I think.
Yeah, maybe also academics need to learn how to talk to people. I mean,
There you go. Thank you. Yes.
there is the way they talk to each other is maybe not how they should be talking in a congressional hearing. I mean, I go back to when Dukakis, a lot of people say he lost the election on this one debate question. Would you support the death penalty if your wife was brutally murdered? And he says, no, because, and goes into a very dry policy analysis. He should have said, yes, I would. I would want that person killed. I would want that person tortured. I would be in pain and anger, but policy should not be based on the extreme pain and anger I would be feeling in that situation. The system has the wisdom to keep me off the jury. I shouldn't be writing, policy, right? In this case, they should have, they could have said, it's a horrible thing to do, to advocate the genocide, but we have to honor due process, and we have to understand what is being said, and what one person calls an advocacy of genocide is not something else. They're probably afraid that if they said yes, well then what about from the river to the sea, and then they could say, I understand why Israelis see that as genocidal, but there are some Palestinians and their advocates who have a different interpretation of that saying. And they'd be on the defensive, but at least they would have shown a human element is there. Is what are we talking about when you talk about the advocate of genocide? It's not like somebody's going to go up there and say all Jews should be dead. But are they going to say things that have that type of implication? And that's where you get into the discussion, and that's where they can say, I really need to know more specifically about what you're talking about, since those actual words are unlikely to be used. It's not that hard, but academics are used to talking in postmodern, language that just doesn't make sense to most people, and they probably should have not have been thinking intellectually when they were there, because they weren't up against intellectuals who were grilling them.
And just to kind of, again, 30,000-foot view here, the first president that stepped down right away. Kind of knew that it didn't go well. This president kind of hung in there as long as she could. But the idea, she was attacked because of plagiarism claims. That actually surfaced on 4chan, and that's highly sort of the Thunderdome type black internet, dark internet place where anything goes. And so people sort of got together and kind of crowdsourced criticisms. And so there was some pushback. I didn't read the letter yet today that was in the New York Times from President Gay, but I think what I've heard and seen from other sources is that they're kind of saying, hey, there was some racism behind this. And the truth is that there was, right? People said, look, if you're out there doing DEI stuff, we're going to target you. If you happen to be, a black woman, the first black woman president of Harvard, we're going to target you. So, and they did, right? So, but the thing is, she did do those academic, the plagiarism claims. Now, from what I've again heard and read, I'm no academic myself, but the idea is that when you are attributing the arguments of other people in building up all the literature and saying, hey, I'm going to make my thesis statement based on the work of lots of other people, and then you get to your original idea after that fact. So she had her own original ideas, but the thing is that when she was explaining what other people thought and building up to what she was going to bring the thesis along, she was sloppy. I think that's the argument there. And so that's why people are saying, yes, you might get, if you were a student, you might get a censure of some kind, like a probation, and it might affect your standing, but you're not going to get kicked out of school right away. You're not going to have your whole life changed. And so some students were saying, hey, if I did this, I'd get in big trouble. So yeah, maybe she deserves to be in some trouble, but that gave enough inertia, I guess, enough momentum for the movement, for her to ultimately decide it was best to be removed. But realistically, I think this was about her being targeted as somebody who for her own beliefs, and more importantly, for her lack of ability to explain those beliefs in common language. And I'll just say this one last thing here. I'm in Florida right now, and I've spoken to people from conservative states while I've been here, several different conservative states, and they've asked me, like, can you explain to me why that these people can't figure out how to explain diversity? Can you
Yeah.
explain to me why nobody can explain away the woke culture criticism of DeSantis, Governor DeSantis? He's got all these, arguably bigoted or at least ignorant ideas about wokeness. Can you explain why nobody else can explain this? And so it's not just left academia. I think it's like most people, which is telling that we have a culture, we have a society where these culture war topics are so hot button that people are afraid to talk to other people about it because the consequences are high and the tolerance is low.
There is, and we've got a lot. I mean, I take issue with some I've talked about on this show with some of the ideology that is there. I think that for instance, what is it, white fragility, written by a woman in corporate America. I think it's very typical white woman, and I think that there are some really good points, maybe up to chapter 3. But first of all, in taking this whole psychotherapeutic approach to dealing with racism, I think is just a dead end. But also just the terminology and the fact that you're really not allowed to challenge anything. You're supposed to listen to it, and then if you challenge it, you're a racist, right? I mean, it's just that's basically what she says over and over again. I don't think the book is worth the paper it's written on. I'm sorry, and I know people will take me to task on that, but we really need to rethink how we're doing this, because it's a loser. It's a loser argument. We are not going to get, even most people of color that are working class don't buy into this stuff, and we really need to rethink, how we talk and our conceptualization of what is real, because what happens is there's a backlash against the very concept of systemic racism. There are, they have African American academics like Thomas Sowell, saying there's no such thing as systemic racism. There are racist people, and there, and we can contain them, and by the way, Roots lies to you, and the slavery began before white people were even around. All these things are true, but also irrelevant. But we don't have a framework that we're vulnerable to attack because we don't know how to talk. I mean, we change our terminology all the time. They're right about that. We focus on it, then some academic comes along, and then it takes or it doesn't take. I mean, I don't know if there's a committee somewhere making these decisions, but we've got to take a look at that. Why is it that that we have a significant part of the left that does not see Jewish people as marginalized, as there being anything called systemic anti-Semitism, and take it very seriously? Why is there a perception that all Jews are white? I mean, in Israel, I think about a third of them are, right? Well, actually, a third of the population, but 45% are white by any reasonable definition. It's just we need to rethink this. I'm going to let you have the last say.
Yeah, I know we're like at the 11th hour here, but I think just 2 quick points. One is the golden rule: do unto others as you would have them do to you. And then secondly, the veil of ignorance, right? The concept of the veil of ignorance, which is you when you're trying to solve a problem, you say, I don't know who I am and what my starting position is here. Rawls is basically saying, if you just try to solve every problem as if you were the person in the worst possible position, then you give people the benefit of the doubt. You meet people where they are, and that, whether it's Palestinians and Israelis, or whether it's multiculturalism, trying to collaborate successfully in the workplace or in academia. The idea ultimately is that golden rule, but the jargon is where we lose people. And I think you and I are going to see a lot more of this as this presidential election season ramps up and it gets really contentious.
Maybe even the term marginalization itself. We'll talk about that another time.
Eeny, meeny, chili beanie, the spirits are about to speak.
Are they friendly spirits?
Friendly? Just listen.
That brings us to our final segment, predictions. Dave, what do you have for us?
Well, last week I mentioned that I thought it would be the case that in the Senate races, there's a chance that hot button issues like abortion would bring out more people that maybe are voters who don't vote very often, or people who are independents who are trying to determine which way to go, that somehow Democrats might actually benefit from that. I'm going to start this week with two predictions. I think the Ohio Senate race, Senator Sherrod Brown will be able to hold on to a Democratic seat. And I think also that in Michigan, U.S. Representative Elisa Slotkin will be able to hold on to a Democratic seat. So that's two places where of the top 10 most likely to flip seats, I see the D's taking those two, and I'll do more of these as the election season goes on.
All right. Well, I'll real quickly predict. I think also Casey is going to maintain his position. He's going to be attacked. And I am going to have a prediction about John Tester within the next few weeks. But right now, I want to focus on something more immediate. E. Jean Carroll versus Donald J. Trump. As I mentioned earlier, the Trump's attempt to get the trial put off failed. The trial is going forth on the 16th, which is just a little over about a week and a half away. I predict she's going to win it easily. I mean, he lost the last trial and then went out and defamed her again, like that very day in a press conference. But I believe that with this trial happening, it's actually may for the first time, because we are now actually in the primary times, may actually have a little bit of an impact on his polling and his voting. And I think that after that loss, the states, Iowa, and well, I don't know if the trial will be over by Iowa, but and New Hampshire and South Carolina are going to be closer than the polls indicate between the distance between him and DeSantis and Haley. With that, until next time, stay informed and stay engaged.